first of all, is to extend our deepest gratitude to our panelists and our moderators for both your work in the field, but also for participating in this today. And we're grateful for everyone who's joining us for this conversation and your participation and your expertise, because we recognize that many of you are experts in this field as well. Special thanks to the organizing team, Peggy Driscoll and Brooke Kale on the foundation staff, and Len Berman and Steve Emmett Maddox, who are members of our environmental affinity group. So a few housekeeping items. We will have a post-event survey. Please do fill it out, because that's critical to us planning future events of this kind. We will be producing a guide, and it will put as many of the resources in that guide that we'll be sending out in the next week or so to everybody who's registered. We'll be recording the panels. You probably saw a message pass across your screen about that, so that folks who can't join us today will be able to watch it later. You're welcome to post questions. Ideally use the Q&A function, but we'll be monitoring that as well as the chat function. And we'll address as many questions as possible in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our fearless moderator today, former city council member and former mayor of the city of Boulder, executive director of EcoCycle, and a fellow Conservation Colorado board member. So take it away, Suzanne Jones.
Excellent. Thank you, Sue. And good afternoon to everybody. We're so glad that you all are joining us today. And a huge thanks to the Community Foundation for bringing us all together around this important topic. As Sue mentioned, I'm the executive director of EcoCycle. We are turning 45 this year old. We're a local nonprofit social enterprise that innovates, implements, and advocates for zero waste solutions like recycling, composting, and waste reduction, and do that in the service of a more sustainable, equitable, and climate-friendly future. So I'm thrilled to be moderating the second EAG panel, and it's going to start where the other one left off. We learned this morning that plastic production and disposal has a big climate footprint. It also has a huge environmental justice footprint. And we also know that nonetheless, the oil and gas industry intend to keep producing and expanding their production of plastics unless we do something about it. So this panel is about what we're getting more about what we're going to do about it at the local, regional level. And we are thrilled to have a great list of speakers who are going to talk about various solutions of how they're addressing the plastics challenge and coming up with alternative solutions. So we're going to hear from all four of them for about 7 minutes each, and then we'll go to Q&A. Let me introduce all of them at once. First up will be Tim Broderick. He is the Senior Sustainability Strategist from the Office of Sustainability, Climate Action, and Resilience for Boulder County. He will be followed up by Naomi Curland. She is a board member from Sustainable Resilient Longmont and is also executive director of the Longmont Food Rescue in her day job. Third will be Suhki Kaur. Suhki, I hope I said your name right. Suhki is a co-owner and manager at Flavor of India, which is a wonderful restaurant down in Main Street in Longmont, which serves delicious food and is a Longmont sustainable business. And then last but not least will be Brian Coppom, who is executive director of the Boulder County Farmers Market, which is not only a beloved cultural institution in Boulder County and beyond, but it is a leader in coming up with, well, a leader in zero waste events and a longtime partner of EcoCycle. So without further ado, we are going to turn it over to Tim Broderick to hear what he has to say for us for the next 7 minutes.
All right, thank you, Zan. Tim Broderick with Boulder County's Office of Sustainability, Climate Action, Resilience. We approach the work of circular economy, zero waste from the lens of sustainability, which I think Zan mentioned, in some ways, very much so is tied to climate action. Thanks to plans that were set forward in the Zero Waste Action Plan, the Environmental Sustainability Plan, passed through the commissioners, we have been charged to tackle this issue of creating a more circular economy. Obviously, plastics being one of the main components of that circular economy. I look forward to getting into the discussion, the details of that as we kind of dive deeper. But our work lies on understanding what is making up the waste stream itself within the boundaries of Boulder County, and how can we then create actionable plans and evaluate the weight of those actions for all of those members, including the municipalities and unincorporated Boulder County. Some of our most recent work has been the Zero Waste Scorecard. Through that process, we discovered that 2/3 of the materials being sent to the landfill could have been diverted simply through composting and recycling. Connected to that through the supply chain emissions is roughly 245,000 tons of carbon. So there is simple, easy steps that we can be taking as a community to make massive change to increase our diversion rate and accelerate those pieces of the circular economy. At the same time, we're not just looking simply at sortation and collection, we're beginning to look a bit further upstream. I know the story of plastic highlights this idea of engaging design and manufacturing, those who are producing the materials that become problematic further down the stream. We were lucky enough to receive an EPA pollution prevention grant. Through that grant program, we are partnering with food and beverage manufacturers to look at how can we redesign, transform food packaging of manufacturers within Boulder County to be more circular in nature. And circular in nature is a loaded term. You can unpack that in a lot of different ways. You know, the outcomes that we look at are water toxicity impacts, there's recyclability impacts, there's CO2 emissions that are tied to that, and then economics as well. And so those are all pieces, again, when we get into the weeds, we can start to kind of peel some of those back. But any steps in those directions, right, is creating a more circular economy. We also recognize the supply chain outside of our boundaries, which through the study the city of Boulder had done with metabolic and the material flow analysis, that's where the vast majority of products being consumed are coming from. They're not manufactured or extracted within our backyard. And that's another piece that we hope to be able to expand and engage upon. We're involved with state policy, and producer responsibility bills are one way to kind of leverage some change there. But we are looking at all facets of where we can create impact in a collaborative manner across Boulder County with all of the stakeholders to accelerate and reach the goals that the county have set out to create a more sustainable future as it relates to climate action, and as well as a more circular economy.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Hey, did you want to talk any more about your sustainable packaging effort and that pilot, since you have a few minutes left?
Yeah, so we are simply just went under contract with our consultants on that. So we're in the very, very early stages. We're going to be spending the first year gathering stakeholders and basically executing a massive kind of R&D and understanding what would it actually take to create a sort of carrot incentive-based programming, as energy efficiency projects have been in the past, for design and manufacturing. And so our hope is we'll learn where the stress points are. Maybe it's technical assistance. They simply need to understand, you know, comparing their materials versus others and where the benefits gain. You know, maybe it's actually working with the packagers who on smaller scale are outside of the manufacturing and tying in there and incentivizing the actual packaging. Maybe it's the material, the equipment on site, right, to actually transform and get that up to speed to be able to handle the new glues and the technologies that are coming along with it. And so those are the early pieces that we'll do in that study. And then as we sort of move from there into year 2 of the study, we'll basically be implementing a pilot. And our hope is to get 2 to 3 willing food and beverage manufacturers. And we have a lot of interest through Naturally Boulder, as well as just direct individuals who are excited about this, owners of food and beverage within Boulder County, who are going to basically help us learn and kind of run this. And then we'll get the outcomes from it, and we'll measure and we'll create case studies. And then we'll seek long-term funding to try and see how do we accelerate that. And then the hope is once we've sort of learned within that wedge of food and beverage, how do we begin to expand, right? There's the actual food that's making up the material itself. And then there's tech, and there's these other areas within our manufacturing that we can start to kind of look beyond and think about where we could potentially create more wins for both the companies and obviously the goals of the county as well, to create more circular products.
Excellent. Hey, thanks, Tim. We are all lucky, and I think we'd agree, we're blessed to live in Boulder County to have such a local government and both at the municipal and county level, that care about these topics and are interested in being leaders. So thank you for your efforts. And with that, let me turn it over to Naomi Curland, who's with Sustainable Resilient Longmont.
Hi, thank you. I'm Naomi Curland. I am a board member of Sustainable Resilient Longmont, a local educational and advocacy nonprofit, and I chair their Zero Waste Committee. I am also the executive director of Longmont Food Rescue. So zero waste issues are near and dear to my heart, and I am thrilled to be on this panel to talk about local actions that you can take to bring about a more sustainable circular economy in your community. First, I want to briefly mention some individual actions you can take today. There are some obvious ones like bringing a reusable water bottle and travel mug with you to avoid plastic bottles and disposable cups. And then there's the next step, bringing reusable takeaway containers with you when you dine out to avoid single-use disposables, and shopping at bulk stores and farmers markets with your own reusable bags and containers. In Longmont, we are fortunate to have Simply Bulk Market on Main Street, and there's Nude Food Market in Boulder. I've included a link to Litterless's Zero Waste Grocery Guide for Colorado in the resource guide that the Community Foundation will send out after these panels that details other bulk and zero waste stores in Colorado. Another personal action is to reuse and upcycle containers and plastic packaging you receive whenever possible, rather than recycling, since as we saw with the story of plastic, a very small amount of plastic waste is actually recycled, and even then it's usually downcycled. Last summer, our Zero Waste Committee produced a series of 3 webinars on how to live a zero waste lifestyle, which include ideas for upcycling. All are available on SRL's YouTube channel. For consumer choices, you can use Good Business Colorado's member directory to find businesses that align with your values. Their network of businesses are committed to good and fair working conditions, equitable communities, and environmental sustainability. Their Resilient Restaurants page can help with your dining choices and feature restaurants like Flavor of India. And to provide customer feedback on company sustainability practices, you can use free apps like Plastic Score and Remark to assess and rate packaging and help others vote with their dollars to support sustainable businesses. But as the story of plastic emphasized, passing the burden of responsibility on to the consumer is not the solution. We need systemic change. And the best way you can have a direct impact on your community is through organized local action. Grassroots advocacy groups like Sustainable Resilient Longmont lobby our local representatives for policy change, and through persistent group action, we can get real results. Beginning in 2014, SRL started to lobby our city council for composting services in Longmont, and in early 2015, there was an open forum on the issue. After 18 months of ongoing public comment, City Council directed staff to start exploring a composting program in August 2015. The research and development phase for the ordinance took about a year, with changes reviewed in May 2016, and the final ordinance passed in the fall. Then the actual program had to be implemented, and the curbside composting program finally launched in July 2017. Throughout the whole process, SRL had been providing public comment and campaigning with the goal of universal compost, or at least an opt-out model, though ultimately the city decided to go with an opt-in program. So I tell this story to share what a local advocacy group can do and how long the process may take. Not only did SRL provide public comment at city council meetings, but our members also met individually with the mayor and city council members, waste services department heads, wrote letters to the editor in local newspapers, a steady ongoing campaign. SRL also continued to assure our local leaders that we were going to publicly support it. As soon as City Council passed the ordinance, SRL did educational outreach, tabling at events, sharing information about how to sign up. Currently, we are still promoting composting and doing outreach about it through our webinars, fundraisers, and social media campaigns. Our current campaigns are focused on expanding our city's zero waste goals with a universal recycling ordinance to require all businesses and multifamily units provide recycling services. And we are also pushing for it to include an expansion of composting services to businesses and multifamily units as well. Concurrent with this is a public campaign to support the construction of the proposed Boulder County composting facility, so we aren't hauling our green waste 80 to 100 miles round trip, which would reduce costs and greenhouse gas emissions. You are all probably familiar with reduce, reuse, recycle, but our updated sustainability slogan is refuse, reduce, reuse, refill, recycle, and rot. Refusing unnecessary packaging and waste, refilling containers rather than purchasing new, and rot means composting any green waste we produce. We are also supporting a revision of Longmont's 2008 Zero Waste Resolution, which was more conceptual and aspirational rather than concrete with its goal setting. This is an opportunity for the city to commit to public parks, golf courses, city events, services, and facilities going plastic-free, and to institute a firm zero waste policy for all publicly funded entities. To this end, we are also campaigning to expand the Green Star School program to more schools in St. Vrain Valley School District. There are lots of ways you can get involved in local organizations and actions. In Longmont, we not only have SRL and City Council meetings we can attend, but there's also the Longmont Sustainability Coalition, which is a city-run working group that meets quarterly to advise, review, and provide feedback on the city sustainability plan and implementation. Any interested community member can attend these meetings and participate in the process, and the next meeting is actually this evening at 5:15. I encourage you to look at your city's website to see if there are similar opportunities in your area. If you don't have a local advocacy group in your area like Sustainable Resilient Longmont, you can organize your own. You can get started by creating a meetup or a Facebook group and begin networking to set up meetings to address local issues. I also invite you to check out 350 Colorado and 350 Boulder County for opportunities to take action at a grassroots level in your community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Naomi. It's pretty impressive, all the great work that Sustainable Resilient Longmont's doing, and you are a great community partner. I know the EcoCycle and many others, so thanks for your leadership on all of that. I'm sure people will have questions for you, but for now, let us go to our next speaker, which is Suhki Kaur from Taste of India.
It's Flavor of India. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Suhki Kaur. I'm from Flavor of India restaurant in Longmont. We were practicing some sustainability measures even before the city of Longmont launched the sustainability program. So I was very excited to support city's effort when they launched the program. I believe we were one of the pilot businesses when city launched the program. So in our effort to reduce plastic, we started using compostable containers like something like this. So our nature of our food tend to get kind of soggy and moisture. So we had some challenges in the beginning when we converted our boxes to compostable boxes. So we had a few customer complaints here and there for our boxes kind of getting soggy. So we found alternative ways to continue using the compostable boxes. We still have some plastic, we still use some plastic containers like these ones, which are deli containers for our curries and sauces until we find more efficient way to pack our curries. I think I was working with a Resilient restaurant person, I think named Robert. We've been looking into some possibility to find some plastic container that are, these are completely recyclable, that are more recyclable and more efficient. And also I would advise, as Naomi said, that to always reuse these plastic deli containers. Even if you go to our restaurant or any other restaurant, I use it all the time. I personally never have trashed or recycled these. I use it for my, to pack my kids' snacks or to use for leftover foods. In addition to that, we have also changed our straws to more composable straws, also composable wax paper, and we have added a composable services through Western Disposable Trash Company, so to reduce any of our food waste. So everything, most of the things that we've been doing does come with challenges. Some of the challenges that I think we have faced, not only just the cost, but also training everyone, including myself. I think we all have been in a habit of doing things in a certain way. So telling everyone, training everyone what goes in a trash, what goes in a compost, what goes in a recycle. We had few trainings from Sustainable Business Program, but I think there's still a lot to learn. There's many things we think are recyclable, but those are not, as we saw in the movie that you guys produced and sent it to us. So we are continue working towards training our employees, training ourselves. I think it's just a process of learning as we go on. And one piece of advice that I would give it to our customers or our consumers, if you go out to eat, try taking your own containers. As again, Naomi already mentioned, I had few customers, they still come with their, they started to come more with their to-go containers or metal straws too, because the compostable straws does get soggy, so they don't like. But next time they come, they would bring their own straws, own to-go boxes, so that way you guys are helping reducing our costs, businesses' costs, and also doing something great for our planet Earth. We're all in this together. So that's another, last but not least, I think as a parent, I would say, I think we should also start with a younger generation, teaching our kids. I teach our kids what goes in a compost in our home. We have compost services, we have recycle services, we have trash. So I have been teaching them, starting from beginning, as I said in the first, that we are all in a habit of doing things in a certain way. So when we start with our younger generation, I believe we can definitely reduce the plastic pollution, and we can definitely thrive together. And we will continue, despite all of the challenges, as a restaurant owner, we will continue supporting our community and continue with our journey of being more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suhki. Sorry I got the name of the restaurant wrong. Flavor of India, not Taste of India. But we really appreciate your leadership and proving what's possible by local restaurants trying things out, being leaders, and showing the way for others. I think is really an important component of how we are going to make systemic change. So thank you for that. Last up, we have Brian Coppom, who's Executive Director of Boulder County Farmers Market.
Great, thank you, Zan. So if it looks like I'm being a little self-conscious, I had a video taken the other day and I watched it, and I told my wife, we were driving, and I said, oh my God, I'm like such a slow talker. And she had one of those laughs like you're 57 years old and you just figured that out. So all of a sudden, I realize I'm a slow talker, so I'm going to try to be a little bit faster than I usually am. I'm Brian with Boulder County Farmers Markets. As some of you may know, we operate 5 markets. The Boulder Farmers Market on 13th Street is our flagship, and our first market established in 1987. And we've been doing zero waste for certainly since before I got here in 2013. And as Zan mentioned, we're incredibly fortunate to partner with the EcoCycle on these efforts because it's not been easy. And we do work with about 230 different independent businesses who sell at our markets, which has given us a fair amount of insight into some of these challenges with plastic. Particularly in our food systems. So I do have a PowerPoint that I want to share just to try to capture some of these points. And I'm going to, let's see, do this. Do the panelists see the PowerPoint? Can I get it? Okay, awesome. So The issue of plastics at the market, as I mentioned, we are zero waste, and we've been doing this for a number of years. Because of our partnership with EcoCycle and the coaching and the help that they've given, in 2019, we had a 94% diversion rate from the landfill, which I thought was really good. And then I watched the movie on recycling and plastics, and I was like, oh my God, I mean, is it really good? Because I don't know, contamination, for instance, is one of the issues that we really deal with at the market. But we do compost and recycle. We started hanging little bags at both of those stations for waste, because people bring things in that are not compostable or recyclable, even though all of our vendors are asked to use only compostable or recyclable materials. And we realized that outside product is actually a big source of contamination. We do have regular training and support from EcoCycle, and we also have zero waste staff and volunteers who man the stations and essentially have those little pickers where they go around and grab something from one bin and put it in the other bin, or put it into the landfill bag in order to keep it as clean as possible. Packaging at the markets, this is an interesting topic, because one of the advantages of the local food system is that you can actually bypass a lot of the packaging. And Naomi mentioned nude foods and this idea that maybe we just don't package foods. So in this upper left-hand picture, you see Tui and Sons Farm here. And this is pretty typical for our local food system, to have this raw agricultural product really just kind of displayed without packaging. Often when there is packaging required, you can see the tomatoes. I don't know if my cursor is actually showing up on the screen when I do a little cursor thing here. But most of the farmers will use this kind of fiber packaging for pints. Fruit, of course, you often are buying in paper bags, so that does eliminate plastic in those cases. But there are cases where we do have plenty of plastic at the markets. One of those where I'm kind of giving it a B grade is where we have food packaging that, in the case of, for instance, meat, is required. You can't just, as far as I know, they can't just have a slab of meat out on the table and ask you to put it in your bag. It does have to be packaged, it has to be labeled, it has to be certified. And then there are some products like the beans and popcorn that we see here that are in reusable packages. So they're not single use, but they will eventually go into the landfill unless we're saving those and trying to repurpose them for something else, which is pretty unlikely. And then there's the plastic that we perhaps have the greatest opportunity to work on eliminating or reducing. And that is the bags, just the bags that often we just use for shopping, like for carrying product from one place, the market, to home. So we do have some vendors, you're probably familiar with the fill-a-bag, so there's always a plastic bag there because they are inexpensive. And for farmers who are already in a low margin, high risk industry, cost is a real factor. And particularly for local growers, whether they're at the market or selling elsewhere, the true cost of growing food is high. And then you add packaging costs on top of that, and people, frankly, have a negative reaction to expensive packaging. So you will tend to see some of these plastic bags that really kind of become the poster child for what not to do. And also up here in the upper left, there's the basil. You know, farmers really often need to pre-package, pre-weigh, and pre-price product because they have to sell as much as possible within the short time of the market. And this allows them to sell more. There's also, our culture is very food safety conscious, and having things in a package makes us feel like it's safer. And I say make it feel because it can be a perception. Generally, I think it's understood that it is, but I feel like our entire federal regulatory system around food safety does not help us when it comes to these ideas of how to localize food streams and in fact limit the amount of unnecessary packaging. Last year in 2019, we really tried to get a handle on these plastic bags by initiating a compostable program. And what this looked like was essentially the market being the bulk purchaser of plastic bags. So we would get a volume discount. We could buy at a level where we could get that next notch down in pricing. And then on top of that, we offered to subsidize 50% of the cost of compostable packaging as an incentive to get all of our vendors on board with using compostable produce bags and compostable shopping bags. And it was an interesting program, I think in many ways successful, in part because some of our vendors who wouldn't normally use compostable because of the cost were using it, but we did run into challenges. So here we're subsidizing, but in the long run, we can't continue to subsidize the packaging. And so it does cost more. One of the things we learned pretty quickly was, remember that those packages for frozen meat, when that's frozen, those things have a very rigid profile. And these compostable bags are very much prone to tearing. And once they start tearing, they just go for it. There's no real holding it back. The tear will just perpetuate. So that was a challenge for our meat vendors who wanted to use the compostable shopping bags for their customers, but they were worried, and it happened, that the product would just fall out because of the tear. And then also one of the things that we realized that in our curbside business now, we're very much seeing this. Compostable bags, you think a bag is a bag, but the standard produce bag is an engineered piece of plastic. It was engineered specifically to allow a certain amount of moisture through, a certain amount of air through, no more, no less. And those characteristics make it ideal for preserving fresh produce. Compostable bags have not gotten to that point yet. So essentially, they allow produce typically to dehydrate at a much higher rate than a standard cheap produce bag. And where customers were, and I think we were as well, thinking, put a pound of spinach in it, you take it home, put it in your drawer. What customers were finding is that the produce wasn't lasting as long. It wasn't lasting nearly as long. You'd go back to the spinach and it would be wilted, or your root vegetables were starting to rot. And that's a real issue because the perception of value for the local food system is based in part upon the idea that the food will actually keep longer. And when we're talking apples to apples, it does keep longer. However, when we have packaging that doesn't work, that's no longer true. And if the consumer doesn't realize that, then the onus is back on the farmer. You sold me something that wasn't fresh. You sold me something that was inferior because it started to go bad quickly, when it really came down to the bag that it's stored in.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
I'm here to urge you to wrap it up.
Thank you for moving the slow talker along. Do I have 1 minute?
Well, sure, but you are already 2 minutes over.
Okay, so food court, we're all compostable in the food court. And we also have a program that we were hoping to do in 2020, but maybe next year, not 2021, 2022, where we're doing reusables. And then we also at Seeds Library Cafe, we're doing vessel to vessel program to eliminate compostables altogether. And there are some really serious costs associated with that. And I would just simply end this by saying, none of this works without two things. We have to be willing to take a risk, either a personal risk to say, can I get this to go in my own container and not feel self-conscious about it? And also to be patient with one another, because when I get a product and I'm not happy with it because it's in the packaging I say I want, but it affects my quality and I get indignant, it's a problem. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Brian, I'm sorry to rush you through the last few slides. Looked really interesting. But let's get to some questions. I want to first thank all the panelists for their thought-provoking presentations. And we know that it was thought-provoking because we are getting lots and lots of questions in. Just a reminder, put them in the Q&A. And I will, we have some deeper ones that everyone will answer, and then some quick ones for just specific answers. So let's start with Naomi. How to support the city of Longmont in their movement towards a universal zero waste ordinance?
Well, as I mentioned, giving public comment at city council meetings is really great, speaking to your public representatives. But really, if you want to get involved in this campaign, the best way is to join SRL's Zero Waste Committee, because we're organizing these campaigns, such as the group public comment, such as talking directly to our mayor, city council members, writing letters to the editor of local newspapers, attending the Sustainability Coalition meetings to provide the direct feedback to our city sustainability department. So all of these actions you can join in on or learn more about. We share information about how to have these conversations in our meetings and also through the Google Groups emails. So to join, you could go to our website, or you can just send me an email, naomi@srllongmont.org, and I will drop both of those in the chat.
Excellent. And I will just say, as a former elected official, talking to your elected officials to create the political momentum and space for change to happen is really important. So yes, let's hear it for advocacy. We have a suite of questions around how do we help businesses make a transition to compostables or reusables. So let me start with you, Tim, and then anybody else can jump in about what are the resources at the county level to help businesses? I'm thinking PACE maybe.
Yeah, so Partners for a Clean Environment, that is our green business outreach program. They have a branch of what they do that is specifically focused on helping businesses transition away and out of sort of single-use plastics. They're very well versed in understanding where materials flow to as they exit, the restaurants themselves. They're aware as well of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with specific materials that are connected in there. And so they're an incredible resource to tap into when zero waste ordinances are getting implemented. If, City of Longmont, that's moving forward, or City of Boulder, I know has been doing it for quite some time. As well as there are other resources that the individual municipalities often have. I believe City of Longmont has their own sort of version of green business outreach. Not super familiar with the name of it at this point, but it's worth looking into your city's website and kind of poking around and learning about what green business outreach exists. And if it's not strong, again, advocating, showing up and asking why doesn't it exist? What can we do to create those resources so that folks can be aware of those programs? I do know there's some incentivization as well that PACE has. There's some monetary help there to help businesses transition over. They run several grant programs, and I'll throw PACE's link up in the chat where you can kind of dive deeper into those and check out those resources.
Great. I want to turn it to the Longmont folks to talk a little bit more about that, about the Sustainable Business Longmont efforts, but also specifically outreach to restaurants as well. So I don't know, Naomi and Suhki, do you want to talk to us about how businesses and restaurants in particular get help in Longmont?
Personally, from my personal experience, when Bernice, I think she is one of the Bernice and Matthew, I think they're one of the directors of the Sustainable Program. So there's a tons of information that I am still learning. They send us information, newsletters every week or so. So there's a lot of information in there. And a resilient restaurant, that's the also program that I find out through the sustainability program. So I think you can go online and sign yourself up for the newsletter, and there you can definitely find so many resources to help. And I'm currently working with a PACE for a PACE certification. So as soon as we have less COVID restriction, I will have someone come in and do the assessment on our building so we can get the PACE certification. Yeah, so there's so many things that can be done.
Yes.
Naomi, did you have anything?
Yeah, so the link to the Sustainable Business Program for Longmont is in the chat now. I had mentioned briefly the Good Business Colorado, that they also provide support. They can provide some funding to help with that first 2 years of transition from, non-sustainable packaging and to-go containers to more sustainable options, and help coach through that process. And then Robert with the Good Business Colorado and the Sustainable Resilient Restaurant Guide has also put together a food packaging guide to help with, there was a question about food packaging and where are resources for that. So that's, he just started that about a month ago. And then there's also sustainablepackaging.org. So I will drop those resources in the chat as well.
And one follow-up question on that, Suhki, someone wanted advice on how do you get your other favorite restaurants, if you have any other favorites besides Flavor of India, how does one get their other favorite restaurants to switch to compostable? What's your advice on approaching other restaurants?
Personally, I mean, I think if there's many regular customers that have businesses have built, like if we've been in business for 14 years, and then I know there's so many customers that would if they come up to me, they're like, hey, Suhki, you should definitely look into this. You should definitely try this, So I think that trust that you have built into your favorite restaurant, simply if you just go to them, tell them about it, I think they will for sure look into the options of becoming more to starting the sustainability.
Excellent. And I think Brian's advice about asking the difficult questions.
And also, I think there is a incentive if you join the Compostable services for 1 or 2 months. They pay for the services. Then later on, you just continue paying your own. But to encourage other businesses, they do have some incentive that they pay for 1 or 2 months.
Excellent. And I also know in the city of Boulder that they, I don't know if they've run out of subsidies, but they were helping pay for a few months of compostable services in Boulder as well to help with that transition. Let me turn to Brian. There's a question about how do we get more zero waste events to become zero waste events, and that builds on the Boulder County Farmers Market, both in moving to compostables, but maybe even moving on beyond that to reusables. What's your advice to others?
Well, I think somebody may have pointed out in the chat that the city of Boulder may require events to be all compostable and zero waste. And I think that's actually a really important step. Is sometimes it really just takes being able to say, look, we didn't want to do it, but the city made us, or the county made us, that because convenience is lost. And outside of that, it's really advertise the values and the benefits of it. People don't like inconvenience. It's just, we're going to have to get past it.
And also note that EcoCycle works a lot. Back when we go to having public events again, EcoCycle works a lot with venues and with folks holding events to help them work with their vendors and implement zero waste strategies. So you can look us up as well. Man, there's a lot of great questions. I'm going to go to a deeper question for all of you, and that is, what initiative would have the greatest impact if it was implemented to help your efforts in your individual businesses or whatever in a move towards circular, more circular economy? What initiative would you like to see the city, the county, the state implement that would help in those efforts? Okay. Brian, why don't you lead off?
Thanks. This is just an easy one for me. So I would like Tim to get a ton of money to do engineered compostable packaging, because if it's a successful solution for the businesses, they will integrate it. There's enough push to do that. But what they can't do is have second-rate product in consideration of these other concerns, which are valid, but they'll fail as a business, and that's not going to drive them there. So I want to give Tim lots of money.
Well, to build off of that, on the idea of the compostable containers and expanding that would be to be supporting the local Boulder County compost facility being built, and also the like I said, the universal recycling ordinance, have one of those locally for us that is more comprehensive, that addresses recycling for businesses and multifamily units, and also provides composting options for those businesses and multifamily units, so that we have these local resources. We're not hauling waste. We make it more cost efficient. We make it less impactful on the environment to be hauling it. And we're really, saying we value the circular economy. We value these resources. And so we're going to invest in our community to build the facilities that can process and turn it into something that sequesters carbon, turn it into compost that's going to go back into our local growers and grow local food here. It's just a win-win circular system there.
I couldn't agree more. If we want to implement these solutions, we need the infrastructure in place. And for folks who want to get involved in the effort around the compost facility, which is right in the middle of the land use process, we urge folks to reach out to the commissioners and tell them that you think it's important. And maybe you can put a link to resources about that in the chat, Naomi. Do any of the other panelists want to try to answer that question about circularity? What initiatives you would like to see in place to help you do that?
I'd love
Tim,
to
you're
jump in,
looking thoughtful.
especially since Brian's giving me so much money, I can do whatever I want now, right? No. It's the question, the way it's posed, right? Greatest impact, and that's one of those things. What is impact? How are you defining those boundaries? Because as I mentioned before, every single direction you sort of go has pros and cons associated with those materials. The one that's sort of the silver bullet, but probably the hardest because it falls on behavior often, and also impacts sort of our design and manufacturing of our materials, is reusability, right? We sort of always look at the cycle of compostable and recycling, which is important to achieve zero waste, but this idea of reduction and reusability and focusing in that. And if I could come up with an idea that, oh my gosh, could implement that and reduce everything by 50% overnight, the correlation on the savings of greenhouse gas emissions and waste reduction would be absolutely massive. That's a dream for me. Now, in the reality of where we stand today, the requirement of recycling and the requirement of composting is clear and evident in its impact. Municipal solid waste, greenhouse gas reductions, recycling is numero uno. We should have recycling at every single home, at every single business, and it should just be a part of the status quo of how we function. At the same time, I fully recognize, given the hindrance of cheap landfill tipping fees, right, associated mileage of driving these materials, there's a cost associated with that. And that goes back to infrastructure and how do we drive down costs to create accessibility. And that's a piece that bleeds into equity, right? Because if we want sustainable living to be a part of part of our lives moving forward, we have to make it economically viable, so that all members of our community can participate in that lifestyle. And that's the piece where the infrastructure sort of plays into that. But a piece that I challenge everyone to get involved in advocacy, I feel like we've said it time and time again, those zero waste ordinances or the requirement of recycling and composting can have massive impacts. We know that statistically within our county. We have the numbers to back that.
Excellent. Okay, a couple more questions. A lot of people are asking for resources. Let me just say, if you don't live in Longmont and you want to join efforts, one of the ways you can do that is to go to EcoCycle's website and become an eco leader. And we have people from all over Boulder County participating in trainings, but also working in their individual communities. So that's one way to do it. Tim, people wanted to know how to follow your work.
Yep. And I realize I just answered the question directly, but I'll add it in the chat. We have a brand new newsletter, actually. We just got a climate communications staff member. So it's a really incredible newsletter where it talks about the big projects, the EPA project, the USDA grant we're working on, all these other good stuff, the zero waste scorecard. So I will throw that up in the chat where the newsletter is and folks can sign up.
Excellent. Okay, here's another broad question. What social equity issues should local government, businesses, and consumers be aware of as we try to make changes at the individual, local, and business level? Someone want to take on social equity and some things we need to be mindful of? Anybody care to wait on that one? Brian. Oh, Naomi and then Brian.
Okay. So I think this is also can be related to another question that was about how to respond to an argument about asking more of our local small businesses too. So we're talking, you know, when we're talking about multifamily units and we're talking small businesses and people who might be renters, how do we not pass this on to people who might not be as able to afford additional fees? And I think that one of the things we have to remember is our elected officials are elected officials, and our local government is, we're paying for these programs. And so we really can have the political will to put our tax dollars where we want them to help subsidize for smaller local businesses, to create these incentives to help with multifamily units who might be, you know, wanting to pass it on to people who couldn't afford to do composting or recycling. There could be, you know, additional incentives that we create through our tax dollars. If we want to allocate those funds that way, we just have to make a very strong stand that we want to support, you know, local businesses and other consumers who might not have the additional resources, so that everyone can have access to recycling and composting.
Brian.
I completely agree with Naomi, and I would just, this comes up in the local food system as well. There are community benefits by doing these things. Everybody in the community benefits presumably equally. However, when we try to distribute the cost of that equally across a system that has considerable inequities in it, it doesn't work. So there really has to be public investment. There has to be those of us who can pay a little bit more doing so everybody can benefit and participate in this. Otherwise, it's going to be a persistent issue and we're always going to be stalled.
Excellent. And I guess we did sort of answer this question, but one more coming from Sherry. How do you respond to, we care about all this, but we don't want to ask more of our small business in the face of COVID? And I guess adding the COVID twist on that, what are people's responses about asking more at this time? Is this the time to keep moving forward, or do we need to pause everything because of COVID? Does anybody want to respond to that?
So in the county government, you know, our work has sort of marched forward, and I'll speak to the USDA Community Compost and Food Recovery Program, which is the Restore Colorado program, which some of you maybe have heard of, not heard of. But essentially it's looking to partner with restaurants to have a 1% surcharge. And that money is then collected and then allocated towards on-farm conservation practices, specifically the application of compost. And the gentleman who started it originally out in New York and then moved to the Bay Area, you know, his thought was that basically restaurants can take responsibility for the impact from their supply streams of the food coming in. We launched this just as the pandemic was happening, so it's not the greatest time to ask more, right, of our restaurants. But one of the pieces that we've been really interested in sort of the response from restaurants is there's a climate crisis. That's not going away. And so if we don't continue to march, even in the face of a pandemic, against some of these challenges, even with the burden of potential, you know, higher costs, and government should do its part, right, to create incentivizations, make it easier, you know, release policies where necessary that can help level the playing field with it. But it's critical that we continue this work at this time, given all the information we know about with the climate crisis, and that's not slowing down despite the pandemic roaring right now.
And just to jump on that, I mentioned some of the timelines that's involved with policy change when I was talking about the community action level. You know, we're looking at a COVID crisis right now that we're dealing with vaccine level of addressing that. To put together, you know, these universal waste ordinances to work on the big policy level stuff, we're looking at a timeline of maybe a year to be developing this. So there's no need to halt it to worry about how the businesses are going to be impacted in the short term. I think we need to keep moving forward and look at the big picture here. And yes, we need to be addressing the COVID issue, but I see no conflict right now with some of these bigger changes we can be still working on writing policy and working around getting public support for it. And then, you know, the actual implementation is going to still be down the line a bit for a lot of this.
Zan,
Excellent.
if
All
I
right.
may just,
Oh.
sorry, if I may just add real quick, I think this is one of those areas where we really need to be generous with one another because people are suffering, businesses are suffering, and we need to keep our eye on the ball. There are businesses that are, starting to fill your container again as we move into yellow. COVID's a blip, hopefully, and but we need to make sure we don't lose the momentum that we had.
Great. We're going to stop this wonderful conversation. I hate to do it. We're running out of time, but I want to note that the Community Foundation is collecting all of these resources and these links and is going to get them back out to you. But before I leave the panel, we have one final thing that I want to ask you, and that is basically, what is your call to action? If you we're going to give one bit of advice to people in the audience about what you hope they take away from this in terms of taking action, what would it be? So a little lightning round from each of you about your call to action to the audience. And we're going to start with Tim, and we're going to go down the line.
Knowing the audience of the group that's sort of on this call, getting involved, donating. There are so many grassroots organizations and nonprofits across Boulder County that are doing incredible work in this space. And we are blessed to have them to accelerate and uplift the work. And I think if you can get involved and advocate and donate, that is huge. Show up at city council meetings, vote, meet with your commissioners, meet with your city council trust and all of those individuals. And that is really what moves the needle for this work from my opinion and lens.
Naomi.
Took the words right out of my mouth. That was exactly going to be my answer is, to get more involved on the local level, as we had spoken about before, the city council level, the mayor, and also finding what your groups, your allies are at the local level. And if you don't have one, if you're asking, my community doesn't have one yet, to reach out to some of these groups that we already have in other communities to help get you started. Because I think every city should have an advocacy group that's working to help people campaign at that local level. Because at first it can feel daunting to show up to a city council meeting and speak your mind and give some public feedback or to write a letter to the editor. And so to have a coalition of people who are doing it together, who are providing resources, really, really helps. And so get involved if you can. If you obviously are overwhelmed, don't have the time, whatever, donate to those groups. Find the groups that are doing the work and provide money, because that helps us keep doing what we're doing and advocate on this level.
Suhki.
So yeah, whatever Naomi said, acknowledging each other, talking in groups, or maybe you can make social media groups or Facebook groups. I have personally joined many groups to begin with. Then you can definitely reach your city. If city doesn't have resources, you can definitely go ahead and start something, just take one step forward. Definitely, we can definitely thrive if we all continue working together with one goal.
Okay, Brian, take us home and talk quick.
Okay, my piece is for the rank beginner. Do one thing that's risky, for the next 4 weeks, every week. And this is a cultural problem. I mean, we don't think that we should have to reuse or bring our own containers or do these things that make us stand out, but let's try it. Do one thing and let's see if we can get over our ideas of what is proper.
Okay, sorry, my phone died, so hope this you guys can hear me. Huge thanks to our wonderful panelists, to the Boulder Community Foundation, really, and to the audience. And with that, I'm turning it back to Sue to close this out.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to all of the panelists and to everybody who's participated over the last 2 days. I want to add my own call to action here that we didn't, nobody's really talked about in any of the sessions so far that I've heard. And that is not at the hyperlocal level that we've been talking about today, but at a bigger level of the major corporations. I noticed that there was a comment early on about shareholder primacy and corporations' beholdenness to their shareholders. If you have resources and you own stocks in the stock market, hopefully you are actually investing in clean industries. But one thing we can do is shareholder activism, and to put pressure on major corporations to make changes in all parts of the life cycle of plastics and frankly all of the whole fossil fuel industry. So that would be my call to action, is at sort of at the other end of the hyperlocal. But anyway, that said, I do want to thank everybody who has been on all of the panels. I want to thank all of the participants, thank our organizing team again, Peggy, Brooke, Steve, and Len. And just remind you all that your community foundation is here to make sure that we bring information to our community, data, so that we can make good decisions, policy decisions, as well as personal decisions about where we spend our time and resources. And that, also part of our job is making grants in the community. And so anything that you can do to support all of these organizations, support, of course, the Flavor of India, which has great food, and support our county in these efforts, as well as support the Community Foundation. We appreciate anything that you can do. So this has been just a small little window on a much bigger issue, and there's a lot more to talk about, and we will keep talking about all of these issues. And so we appreciate your participation. So thank you all, and we'll see you at our next Environmental Affinity Group event.